Bem-vindo à gravação da Aula Magna 2023 do Programa de Pós-graduação em Comunicação e Práticas de Consumo da ESPM São Paulo. Esse ano, nós tivemos a felicidade de recebermos para essa aula magna o professor Mike Featherstone, que é um especialista, um dos principais nomes internacionais em sociologia e cultura do consumo. Nessa aula magna, intitulada Sonhos e Consequências da Cultura do Consumo, o professor trata de diferentes aspectos relacionados a esses três principais sonhos da cultura do consumo. Houve um pequeno problema técnico no início da gravação, foi truncado. Então, o que vocês vão ouvir é uma aula em andamento, mas ela está realmente logo no começo. Nós perdemos talvez uns 2 ou 3 primeiros slides apenas. Pedimos desculpas por isso e esperamos que isso não atrapalhe, não comprometa a possibilidade de vocês aproveitarem essa belíssima aula magna que nós tivemos.
From consumer spending.
O professor está trazendo vários dados que mostram a importância econômica da cultura do consumo e o seu impacto no mundo, na economia mundial.
Sorry, I just got a box on the screen about it being recorded in the middle of my...
I'm sorry. Yes, we only started recording now, which is terrible.
Okay.
So we're going to miss the beginning part.
Okay. So the initial point is the global economy consumption is increasingly important, especially the US, which pulls along the global economy, but Brazil very high, 65% of the economy. And we had a financial crisis back in 2007, and the reaction to it was to stimulate consumer demand, to try and re-stimulate it. Very much a contrast to the 1930s, when there was a global economic slowdown, and Roosevelt, the president, used Keynesian economics to stimulate the economy through public works, roads, railways, etc. Get out of the Great Depression.
Ok, just a minute. Então, ele está fazendo um contraponto com a crise financeira de 2007, que a resposta mundial a essa crise foi estimular o consumo, né? Inundar o mercado com crédito e tentar estimular a demanda para o consumo. Isso contrasta de maneira bem evidente com o que aconteceu com a Grande Depressão, né? No cresce da Bolsa de 29 e a Grande Depressão dos anos 30, quando os Estados Unidos investiram na economia keynesiana com investimentos públicos, construindo estradas, etc. Okay. Back to you.
So since the 80s, we've had, for many people, a neoliberal economy on the back of Thatcherism and Reaganomics. This has become dominant, and it involves the dismantling of the welfare state and financial deregulation. It is an economy which has favored social inequalities. It's favored a bigger gap between the rich and the poor, and we've had the expansion of the super rich and a lot of offshore financial services and tax havens.
Muito bem, ele está falando do neoliberalismo, que começou nos anos 80, com a Thatcher e o Reagan, e que se tornou dominante em boa parte do mundo, ou em muitas partes do mundo, e se baseia na desregulamentação financeira, na integração dos mercados globais, provocando um aumento das desigualdades, concentração de renda, né, os ricos e os super ricos, e um desmantelamento do estado de bem-estar social. Okay, back to you, Mike.
It also favors a certain type of person,
yes.
And we have to adapt ourselves to the enterprising neoliberal self. Gary Becker, who is a person cited by Michel Foucault in Birth of Biopolitics, talks about us investing in our own human capital. We have to invest through education and other aspects of culture to build up our capital. But also, we don't just do this to get a job and to improve our career. The argument is that we do this in consumption, that consumption is enterprise activity as well. We try and consume to increase our pleasure, but also to build a lifestyle. So we borrow, buy, sell, accumulate, reevaluate in terms of increasing our consumer lifestyle. But as we know, this is something fragile that can go wrong, as we found out in the 2007 crisis, financial crisis, and there was a massive increase in debt, both state debt and individual household debt.
Ok, just a minute, Mike. Então, aqui o professor fala do sujeito empreendedor, né, neoliberal, que precisa investir no seu próprio capital humano, segundo Gary Becker, autor citado pelo Foucault no Nascimento da Biopolítica. Esse investimento também acontece, o investimento no nosso capital humano pode se dar, por exemplo, por investimentos em educação e outros, mas também por meio do consumo. Então, consumo como uma atividade empreendedora, né, no alto empreendedorismo do self contemporâneo. Os consumidores, então, sendo vistos como produtores criativos que vão maximizar sua satisfação, o seu prazer, pessoas que investem no seu próprio estilo de vida, em meios próprios, etc. Mas isso tem consequências, ou pode ter consequências ruins e produzir vítimas, né? Como, por exemplo, na crise de 2007, das hipotecas e dos empréstimos impagáveis, né? Então, isso aumentou incrivelmente o nível de dívida, tanto de estados quanto de domicílios. Okay, back to you.
So for some people, this means we are now facing the end game, the sort of final game of consumption. We have shopped out debt-burdened consumers. Have you ever been shopped out? Too much shopping, you want to stare at the wall. So we can't renew our credit ratings, we can't easily move forward. So is this the end of the consumer dream, which is a sort of American dream? Yet at the same time, the luxury sector, some sectors of the economy, consumer economy, are still doing well, targeting at the rich and the super rich, but also differentiated and spreading out. But the main question really comes around to the sustainability of the consumer lifestyle, the sustainability of the economy, the neoliberal economy, and the consumer way of life.
Ok, just a minute. Então, a principal pergunta hoje é sobre a própria sustentabilidade da economia baseada na cultura do consumo, tanto para estados quanto para pessoas físicas, né? Então, será que isso é um jogo final? Será que a gente está chegando a um momento em que não vai mais haver crédito, não vai mais haver sequer vontade de comprar mais nada? Será que esse é o fim de um certo tipo de sonho de consumo de base americana, né? Em torno do mundo? Embora a gente ainda tem alguns setores que parecem estar bem saudáveis, como o setor de luxo, né, que tem como alvo os ricos e os super ricos, esse setor parece estar indo bem, mas há uma crescente crítica sobre as consequências desse sistema que é desigual e mais pessoas se perguntam sobre a própria sustentabilidade dessas economias neoliberais e desse estilo de vida baseado no consumo. Okay, back to you.
So we have a number of questions I want to address. I don't want to go through all of them, but you can read this and see what we're going to go through. one of the key things, apart from the dreams and consequences we've already referred to, is the question of internet consumption, of the switch to a more immaterial form of consumption. Is it really immaterial?
Uhum.
And then I want to finally end up on looking at the possibilities for change, for new types of consumption, and finally end up looking at the question of, does consumer culture lead to the good life and to increased happiness? Or is it sustainable other alternatives?
Bem, algumas perguntas, que ele não vai responder todas aqui, nem vai se dirigir a todas elas, mas são perguntas importantes que ele lista aqui, baseado nessas reflexões. Algumas dessas questões que ele pretende tratar nessa aula dizem respeito ao nível de materialidade embutida nesse chamado consumo imaterial, consumo por meio da internet, dos aparatos móveis. Será que isso é realmente imaterial? Uma outra questão interessante que o professor pretende tratar nessa aula diz respeito ao fato, a pergunta, né, seria, será que a cultura do consumo de fato leva a uma boa vida, ao aumento da felicidade? Né? Será que a gente poderia pensar em modelos alternativos de consumo? Será que essa cultura de consumo, tal como a gente conhece, é sustentável? Será que a gente poderia pensar em modelos alternativos de consumo? São algumas das questões que ele pretende trabalhar nessa aula. Okay, back to you.
Okay, let's look at the dreams of consumption. 3 dreams we want to examine. The peasant dream, abundance, not limited food and resources, plentiful luxury food, fulfillment. Then there's the court society dream of consumption. This is more a dream of handling luxuries and pleasure in a very carefully orchestrated way and developing a very refined sensibility and presentation of self. And finally, the third dream would be the American dream, success and rewards on the basis of hard work.
Ok, muito bem. Então, aqui ele fala de 3 principais sonhos do consumo. O primeiro é o sonho da pessoa comum, que seria o sonho da abundância sem esforço, né? Bastante comida, a pessoa ficar plenamente saciada, e etc. O segundo sonho tem a ver com a nobreza, e tem a ver com luxo, os prazeres, uma apresentação de si mesmo refinada e cheia de estilo. E, finalmente, o sonho americano, de chegar ao sucesso e ter as suas recompensas, ter como recompensa um estilo de vida de luxo por meio do trabalho duro. Então, você trabalha duro, mas se você tiver sucesso, você tem essa recompensa e merece como recompensa o seu estilo de vida luxuoso. Okay, back to you.
But there are also some bad dreams or nightmares. We can think of the basis, the start of the consumer society and the discovery of the Americas, the subjugation of Mexico and other parts of South America, 100 million people, Las Casas says died in the 1st century, in the 16th century of the conquest. And we can think of the wonderful book by Todorov on this, and also the work of Bartolomé de las Casas, a very interesting account. So consumer culture, the spice trade, the search for consumer goods, for changing the diet, changing the resources, the plantations, the slavery, the cotton, the sugar economies were bathed in blood as well as consumer goods. But today we think also of other dystopian consumer dreams. There's a very wonderful movie by George Romero, Dawn of the Dead, which shows some zombie-like consumers moving around a supermarket in a shopping center in a mall, unable to get out. They're sort of imprisoned in this mall to consume forever. And of course, more recently, we have the idea of internet consumption, the idea of the digital realm. William Gibson, new romancer, was very influential in the 1990s, a sort of artificial intelligence world in prospect. All our activities would be part of this, and the Matrix is another account of this type of world.
Muito bem. Aqui nesse slide o professor chama atenção para os pesadelos também, o outro lado, né, o lado B da cultura do consumo, que foram provocados, por exemplo, e ele pensa nisso, né, por trás da conquista, das grandes conquistas de novos mundos, né, de riquezas, do ouro e etc. Houve a brutal sujeição, né, e aniquilamento no México e na América do Sul. Ele cita alguns livros que tratam bem desse tema. Também os sonhos de consumo distópicos, como, por exemplo, num filme que apresenta consumidores se movendo como zumbis, num marasmo, sem nenhum tipo de expectativa, nesse filme final dos anos 70, e também outros duas obras, né, já mais recentes, tanto o Neuromancer do William Gibson quanto o filme, a trilogia Matrix, que tratam do consumo de internet como se tivesse abrindo a porta para uma era de pesadelo, a era da realidade virtual, da inteligência artificial, num mundo de simulações e também absolutamente sem saída. Back to you, Mike.
So these are some interesting people enjoying themselves. This is a picture by Peter Bruegel the Elder, Lekker land. Lekker apparently comes from a root etymologically meaning cake. Of course, you know, the peasants didn't have cake. They had bread if they were lucky. They dreamed of bread, and cake was sort of somehow way beyond. But here you can see this wonderful dream of abundant luxuries. So cocaine was very prominent in European medieval folklore and peasant culture. A dreamland with rivers of wine, houses built of cakes, barley sugar streets. Roast pigs wandered about with knives, as you saw in the picture, stuck on their side. You can see the knife on the side of the pig, ready for you to kill it and then eat it. Cakes everywhere. Roast geese would fly into your mouth, so you didn't even have to pick them up. You lie on your back, everything is beautiful. A little bit like some images of Carnival, you know, but there's also some bad dream images of Carnival, we know, you know, so I don't want to overplay the link between Carnival and cocaine. But this is a very nice dream of abundance for people who regularly had imposed rationing through famines, and luxuries were few and far between.
Então, que ele está falando de certo tipo de sonho, de uma terra de plenitude, de luxos em abundância, um extremo contraste com uma vida dura de trabalho árduo, muita fome, muita privação, e ele faz uma comparação com o carnaval, embora ele saiba que o carnaval também tem lá o seu lado B, mas o carnaval como um momento de hiato, né, numa vida dura de muito trabalho. Back to you.
A second dream is the court society dream. And I should just say incidentally that this idea of court society was influenced by the work of Werner Sombart, the German theorist who had a counter view of the rise of capitalism to Max Weber. Weber stressed the Protestant ethic, as you all know, but Sombart stressed court society as being the key stimulus for capitalism. Why court society? Well, the trade with East Asia for spices and other exotic goods was on the part of court society, of kings and nobles, to provide the most exquisite and exotic food for them. So the sugar trade started through this type of court motion, and of course silk, which came through China, through Iran, Persia, and then to Europe, went on the same route. So it also had a fashion system, a very intricate fashion system with people wearing fine clothes, and it stimulated the economy in the related city. We think of Versailles next to Paris, people moving backwards and forwards, but lots of tradesmen, lots of artisans, lots of culture people, music, playwrights, novels, were stimulated by the court notion of elegance and novelty. So the desire for beautiful and luxurious things and stylish people was again stimulated by this court culture. And some of these dreams find themselves a couple of centuries or 3 or 4 centuries later into Hollywood with its own notion of performance and style and we've just seen the Oscars,
Yeah.
the ceremony and the star system.
Ok. Bom, então, interessante aqui, o professor resgata um outro autor alemão que contrasta com Max Weber e pensa como o principal drive, da principal coisa que teria levado ao capitalismo, não a ética protestante, mas o sistema de vida das cortes, né? Com o seu tipo, como estimulador do consumo. O consumo das cortes era um consumo extremamente regrado, com cerimoniais precisos, de boas maneiras, etiqueta, esses palácios esplêndidos, como Versalhes, por exemplo, os nobres e as pessoas da corte, os cortesãos, se apresentando com vestimentas de seda, rendas, enfim, o sistema de moda, né, na maquiagem também, nas perucas, tudo era bastante estilizado, a própria comida era exótica e requintada, refinada, tudo isso mobilizava a economia por meio de uma série de artesãos, mercadores, comerciantes e serviçais que precisavam fornecer essas mercadorias. As pessoas, algumas cidades se tornaram centros de inovação no luxo, nesse tipo de saber, né? Nesse tipo de consumo e nesse tipo de cultura. E essas cortes, então, se tornaram centros da inovação na moda e na cultura, mas também centros de prazer,
We think here of the court of Louis XIV in the 17th century. He built Versailles, of course, for one of his mistresses, you see, and she wore the finest fashionable clothes, etc., etc. So here he is having his breakfast, and you can see normally you don't have that many people at breakfast, but if you're a king, you do. And they're watching very carefully what you eat and what you do, and any little thing you want is attended to. And of course, Versailles, some of you will have been there, is a very splendid place and befitting a mistress or a king. And we can see the high level of decoration, which was a backcloth for ceremonials. And if you performed incorrectly at a ceremonial, you were out. One guy fell over while dancing, and he was never seen at court again. He was ridiculed and lost his reputation. So reputation became incredibly central.
Bem, o exemplo que ele dá é Versailles, construída para agradar a amante do rei Luís XIV, que, enfim, pressupunha uma vida extremamente estilizada e também um ridículo, né? Uma perda de reputação se você fosse mal em qualquer tipo de ritual desses que era esperado seu comportamento lá, como o exemplo que ele dá de um nobre que caiu durante a dança e nunca mais foi visto, foi ridicularizado para sempre. Okay, back.
So consumer culture then is a long process. We can trace it back a long way, 16th, 17th century, but we think of the birth of a consumer society being organized more around consumption in the 18th century. England, we think of industrial revolution, but there was also a consumer revolution with goods coming from the colonies. The colonial side increased. England went out and built an empire, conquered lands, but also it was manufacturing and producing, especially in the 19th century, cheap everyday household goods for not just the middle classes, but for the working classes. Pots and pans, metal pots and pans, iron bedsteads, tinned food, cotton clothing, Manchester, centre of a cotton industry, sending cotton goods around the world. These were often displayed from the mid-19th century in department stores, which had a very interesting technique. Prior to that time, when you bought things, you went to a shop with a counter and people disappeared in the back and bring you something to the front. Department stores had a very opposite philosophy. They displayed goods. You could walk around goods. This favored more imagination because they displayed them in creative settings, often following themes from folk tales or stories, and provided exotic fantasy type environments. So the term became applied to department stores, dream palaces. Yeah? So it encouraged the dreaming, not just the buying of goods. You bought two things. You bought the material good, but you bought the immaterial dream. See, so these two aspects increasingly went together with 19th century consumer culture. But it was given a big lift, a big push forward with the cinema, especially Hollywood from the 1920s, which became known as the dream factory. Yeah? So people increasingly watched movies to escape their mundane everyday lives in factories and other places. But they went into an environment which had lots of velvet, hanging curtains, careful lighting, and they enjoyed transportation into a different world, a more exotic, more upper class world often, although it could be cowboys or whatever type of movies. But the setting was luxurious. So this was a taste of luxury for the masses in the picture palaces.
Ok, então, ele está falando do nascimento da cultura do consumo, que costuma ser datado lá no século XVIII, quando a Inglaterra não estava às voltas somente com a Revolução Industrial, mas também uma revolução de consumo, com novas mercadorias e exóticas, com mercadorias chegando das colônias, e também fabricando, né, começam a ser fabricados, e lá no século XIX já fabricação em massa de bens de consumo diário para os lares, como panelas, roupas de algodão e etc. Essas coisas eram dispostas nas lojas de departamentos, que fazem uma grande contraste com a maneira como as pessoas iam às compras antes, né? Que tinha um balcão e o vendedor ia lá dentro da loja buscar mercadoria e te trazia no balcão. As lojas de departamento colocam essas mercadorias à vista do comprador, você pode passear entre elas, então não é à toa que elas se tornaram palácios de sonho, né? Foram chamadas disso. Depois o cinema, especialmente o cinema de Hollywood, a partir da década de 20, também começou a ser chamado de fábrica de sonhos, porque estimulava essa ideia de você entrar num mundo paralelo, um mundo de sonho, um mundo elegante, de luxo. Os cinemas, eles próprios, eram finamente decorados com veludo e etc., como se fossem palácios, né? Palácios de sonho também. Okay, back to you.
This is a place some of you will have been to if you've been to London. Oxford Street, Selfridges, built, I think, around about 1909. But very interesting, almost like the British Museum, these Greek columns and the whole massive size of that store, you know, is very impressive. How long it will last, who knows? With internet consumption, the department store is under siege in some ways. But this was a significant move. The early department stores were from about the 1850s. But this is a place I don't think any of you will have seen. I have not seen it. It was an early cinema. But you can see the exotic Tales of the Arabian Nights sort of theme with the domes and sort of minaret style. And the stained glass windows, I think it looks like a little bit like a church. So a palace is not inappropriate, not just the interior, but the exterior carried that iconography. You sadly cannot see this, it's gone. It was in East London, Commercial Road, City of London. And I don't know when it went down, but it would be sometime from the 60s to maybe the 90s, I would imagine. And there are very few of this type of palaces left. Really, they should have had preservation order. You know, we celebrate in England lots of old buildings, but some of these have not been preserved, unfortunately.
Bom, ele mostrou aqui dois slides, da loja de departamento que ainda está lá, do Selfridges, isso, construída no começo dos anos do século XX. Impressiona pelo tamanho e também pelo estilo, né, colunas gregas, etc. E depois, mesmo se falando da crise das lojas de departamentos, ele ainda está por lá, sabe-se até quando. E depois, na outra figura, um cinema que, infelizmente, já foi abaixo, mas finamente adornado também do lado de fora, com minaretes, colunas, vitrôs, tudo para mesmo marcar essa ideia de palácio de sonho. E aí ele fala que é uma pena ter ido abaixo, que na Inglaterra eles preservam a memória de tantos prédios e edificações, mas cinemas como esse não restam mais. Okay, back to you. That's it.
Okay. So the third dream, the American dream, or as the famous novelist Scott Fitzgerald called it, the gift of hope. Yeah, you hope you're going to make it. One day I'm going to make it. I'm going to fight again, and then I'm going to make it. So the dream was a dream of abundance, a new land with plentiful goods, plentiful food, and images of these were very powerful in stimulating migrants from Europe in the 1900s, 1890s, 1900s. A big wave of migrants came, Europe, Italy, Ukraine, many places, Poland, and of course came to Brazil at the same time. So the American dream was of this land of plenty, but it was also a dream of self-transformation, self-improvement. And we get movies from Hollywood like My Fair Lady, Pretty Woman, My Fair Lady, of course, was a play, Bernard Shaw, Pygmalion initially, from a long-standing tale. But this idea of success and getting the rewards for success, which is the luxury lifestyle. And today, of course, many celebrities are our heroes of consumption. They have the glamorous lifestyle, all the consumer goods, and of course the super rich and the rich stand next to them and intermingle with them.
Bom, então, o sonho americano, que é o terceiro sonho de consumo que ele vai examinar, ele cita o Scott Fitzgerald, que fala do presente da esperança, então você espera que você vá chegar lá, né? E isso significa chegar lá, ter o sucesso medido nessa recompensa do estilo de vida refinado, luxuoso, mas também a ideia do sonho americano de autotransformação, de você poder se transformar. Então, ele cita 2 filmes, o My Fair Lady, o primeiro, que é baseado numa peça do Bernard Shaw, que, por sua vez, é baseado numa história antiga do Pygmalion, mas que, de qualquer maneira, assim como depois, mais tarde, no filme Pretty Woman, estrelado pela Julia Roberts, se não me engano, mostra uma ideia de transformação pessoal, de chegar lá, atingir uma vida luxuosa, cheia de bens e luxo, enfim. Daí ele passa a falar das celebridades e como o mundo das celebridades atrai esse tipo de sonho, né? Assim, como se elas vivessem essa vida de sonho, sempre com suas vidas luxuosas e preservando sua aparência e etc. Aqui no slide ele fala também, né, como se as celebridades fossem capazes também de desafiar o processo de envelhecimento. Não tocou nisso, como ele falou, mas enfim. E fala os novos ricos, contrastando hoje com a ideia dos ricos que eram preguiçosos, não faziam nada, mas aqueles que são os heróis do consumo, aqueles que têm histórias de sucesso dentro dessa cultura do consumo. Okay, back to you.
So now I'd like to look at the rhythms of consumption. The dreams are of having all the goods to consume, but this takes planning, it takes organization, and the actual consumption itself may be put next to what we might call para-consumption or auxiliary consumption, the planning of consumption. So the consumer activities spread out to many aspects of our lives. If the goods can be seen as material, you pick up some clothes or you buy some fruit, you eat, you consume it. But at the same time, because of the advertising publicity and the information surrounding goods, we also consume informational goods. Yeah? So the goods have got this double aspect, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on. And of course, the consumption act takes place in particular places such as malls and stores, increasingly on the internet. So there are various rhythms of consumption in everyday life. And what I'm going to go and talk on about is the increasing pace of consumption and how it extends into all aspects of our lives.
Então, os ritmos do consumo, é isso que ele vai tratar agora, como que os ritmos de consumo vêm se intensificando nos últimos tempos e como que isso toma conta de outros aspectos da nossa vida.
Okay. So one of the lessons of consumption, of consumer culture, is don't waste time. But there was a very interesting book in 1883 by Paul Lafargue in France, The Right to be Lazy. to, you can see how this has influenced Bohemian ideas over the century or so. And he was concerned about the too much factory discipline. He didn't want us to be involved with work. It exhausted us. It exhausted our creativity, our noetic capacities. People say this about the internet today. Yeah, we become auxiliary machines to the machinic work of internet algorithms, algorithmic governance people talk about. So the factory system had a similar impact on our sense of time and purpose in the 19th century. And E.P. Thompson, a famous historian in England, examined the whole development of clock time. You know, when the early clocks only had one hand, the hour. You didn't need to know anymore. And we think of how the clock is now and the watch and how the time is carved up. And Foucault talks about this disciplinary society which came into being and how life is governed. So wasting time is an interesting topic.
Então, não desperdiçar o tempo é um dos aprendizados dessa vida, né, da cultura do consumo, desses ritmos do consumo. E aí ele cita primeiro um livro excelente mesmo do Paulo chamado O Direito à Preguiça. É um clássico, publicado originalmente em 1883. O Paulo estava preocupado com os operários perderem a capacidade de criar, de se divertir, levar uma vida que não fosse exaurida, né? Ter sua energia exaurida totalmente pelos ritmos fabris. Ele faz um paralelo com o que se fala hoje da gente ser, do que acontece no mundo online, da gente acabar sendo auxiliar da regulação maquínica das nossas vidas. Se a gente, com mais e mais tempo, passando mais e mais tempo online, trabalhando para esse grande sistema maquínico, como o Matrix mostra tão bem. Não foi fácil, como mostrou o trabalho do E.P. Thompson, esse historiador britânico, colocar a disciplina do trabalho da hora do relógio ponto e etc. Né? Não foi fácil conseguir que os trabalhadores se adaptassem a isso. E depois ele cita Foucault, no nascimento da sociedade disciplinar e do nascimento das políticas de governança da vida, né? A biopolítica. Okay, back to you.
So we are asked to consume 24/7, yeah?
Yes.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there's a nice book by Jonathan Crary with that as the title, 24/7. Machinic time. We become machinized, we become part of the machinic apparatus. And it's interesting to look at the figures on sleep. Round about the earlier part of the 20th century, people slept for 10 hours a night. More recently, 8 hours. Now, average American apparently sleeps 6.5 hours. Yeah, you can say, well, I got plenty to do. I can't afford to sleep. How many people say this? So the boundary between work and consumption breaks down. Sleep is seen as wasted time. And increasingly, we have the 24-hour city, clubs, bars, cafes, leisure, shopping, day and night. And of course, we have on the media and round the clock television, radio. So this becomes a new sort of life where we are aware of time in a way we were not aware of before. And of course, you have the iPhone or whatever in your bedside table, and you're aware of the emails coming in if you don't switch it off. And some people are answering emails in the middle of the night as well.
Muito bem, a ideia de se consumir de forma produtiva, 24 horas por dia, 7 dias por semana, no qual o sonho se torna um luxo. Esse seria uma marca do nosso tempo, um tempo maquínico, né? Que se opõe ou que se contrasta com os ritmos de dia e noite, as estações do ano e etc. Ele mostra estatísticas sobre a diminuição do número médio de horas de sono por dia do americano médio, né? Que antes eram de 10 horas, foi passando para 6 horas e meia. Então, nessa cultura do consumo, o sono é tido como tempo perdido, tempo desperdiçado. As fronteiras entre o trabalho e o consumo se dissolvem muito. Há uma ideia de sempre os ciclos de novos produtos, novos anúncios, novos designs, enfim. Tudo se passa em ciclos muito rápidos, né? Fast fashion é um dos exemplos, para justamente manter os consumidores interessados em continuar consumindo. Nesse mundo de 24/7, né, de consumidores 24/7, que o Jonathan Crary, dos quais o Jonathan Crary tratou também nessa obra de mesmo nome, nós temos a cidade 24/7, com seus ritmos, uma cidade que não para nunca, que nunca dorme, pessoas que também acordam no meio da noite para responder e-mail e etc. E toda uma ideia de não só da cidade nos fornecendo informação, mas também da cidade nos acompanhando, nos monitorando, acumulando informações sobre a gente, uma cidade de vigilância. Back to you.
So increasingly, as we move around the city, we're looking at screens. You bump into people who are looking at screen, walking down the pavement. They're doing various things. Who knows what they're doing? Playing computer games or doing emails, texting, I don't know. But they're multitasking. They're engaged in lots of activities. We also are looking, but the computer is looking at us. Yeah? It's a two-way process. It's watching us. It's watching what we're looking at. And they call this eyeballs. So they are recording the number of eyeballs, where our eye is on the screen. Yeah? How long it stays on that screen before jumping to another screen. All this is useful data. So the computer system is a surveillance system as well, which is recording all the things we look at, and it's trying to make our preferences into profiles of ourselves. They want to build the profile of our tastes and our habits, because then they can target us with tailor-made advertisements, with the correct advertisements they think fit our taste. So this profiling and recommendation economy becomes central. People talk about data harvesting as well. It can make a lot of money. The whole computer advertising data industry is very big, as we'll go on to see.
Bem, aqui a comunicação móvel e as redes digitais têm um impacto grande nos ritmos da vida. Nós constantemente vemos pessoas olhando telas enquanto elas andam pela cidade, fazendo diferentes atividades, muitas vezes ao mesmo tempo. Ele lembra que não só a gente olha para as telas, mas elas também olham para nós. Há todo um sistema de rastreamento, monitoramento das nossas preferências, dos nossos hábitos, dos nossos gostos, no sentido de... E tudo isso é utilizado para que se possa segmentar o público em perfis de preferências e de hábitos, enfim, para que a gente possa receber comunicação personalizada, customizada, mais eficiente. E essa ideia leva a um tipo de monitoramento e vigilância que até então era inaudito. Back to you.
Okay, I'll just slip over this slide as I've talked about some of this and go on to the growth of social media influencers, because this is one aspect of the process. Generating our attention. People talk about the attention economy. Yeah? So our attention, our eyeballs, they want to see us looking and they can send something back to us. And sometimes in split seconds, they can send back an advert in the margin of the page we're looking at, which fits in with the profile they are amending and editing all the time of our tastes and preferences. So I want to look at influencers because they have a big role in advertising on the internet. I'm going to look at somebody called Zoe Sugg, an English one who started off as a teenager and has a blog which a lot of people follow, and she advertises hair products and household cosmetic things as well. But she's made quite a bit of money, not massive, but a reasonable amount of money. I mean, some people may think it's a lot of money. She's made 1 million a year, which is pretty good. And she's worth over $5 million as a young girl without any wealth in the family. So this is the sort of talent show sort of ethos, yeah? This is, you can rise up from the outside, the My Fair Lady sort of ethos.
Então, ele quer olhar para os influenciadores digitais, mais especificamente essa adolescente, começou adolescente, que começou um blog comum, mas foi conseguindo seguidores, enfim, e hoje em dia ela ganha $1 milhão por ano, tem uma fortuna estimada em 5 milhões, pode não ser muito para algumas pessoas, mas pode parecer muito para outras, e ela personificaria, então, essa ideia de alguém que veio do nada e chegou lá, uma espécie de ganhadora de um concurso de talentos, enfim. E esses influenciadores sociais, eles têm uma importância crescente no sistema de consumo hoje. Back to you.
Good. This is her. A young girl from a part of England called Wiltshire. She wrote a novel which was very successful, Girl Online. And she's become a personality. Now, you're saying, that's a lot of money. Could I do the same? Yes, you could. So this is a bank, an American bank, saying how to make money on Instagram. Grow your audience. Make sure your photos are beautiful and unique. Post regularly. Interact with your followers. Befriend other influencers. Become a micro influencer. Yeah, not the top, but start as a small one. Maybe you can get 2,000 followers. Maybe you can charge £200, £400 for a sponsored post. You can show the advertising agencies the data on your number of followers, and they say, okay, yeah, you're a bit niche market, but we're going to have a go. We're going to support you, and we think you might rise up. They're going to encourage you, and you will try.
Então, você pode aprender a ganhar dinheiro como influenciador digital, e aqui ele mostra uma série de recomendações de um banco americano sobre como ganhar dinheiro no Instagram. Comece pequeno, cobre pouco, quem sabe você chega lá.
So you too can become an influencer. This is the My Fair Lady, rags to riches. But you think she's doing well. Okay, well, let's look at some of the top influencers and see how they do. You know this guy? No? Doesn't mean much? No? Well, we'll come on to some other people as well. But this is the world 2023 top influencers. And Cristiano Ronaldo, yeah? He earns $2.4 million every time he puts a post on Instagram.
Wow.
Like saying, today I went training. I had a good kick around, and then I had lunch and came home and played with my baby son. I had a nice day. You could say something like this, and he gets that amount of money for the post. But he has 440 million followers. Yeah? Now, not every day everyone looks at him, but they do the advertising maths, and you're in an advertising school, and you know the data crunching, how you crunch the data on this. So this is incredibly successful. And then you can see the other ones, all of them, even down to number 6, Kim Kardashian, they're all doing pretty well on their posts.
Então, esses são os maiores, né, influenciadores que ganham fortunas por cada post. Mas olha a quantidade de pessoas que eles têm como seguidores.
Yeah. So you're probably thinking about Ronaldo. How much does he make in a year?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in 2021, it estimated he made 135 million from posting on Instagram. And he wasn't posting every minute. I don't know how many posts he made, but you can work it out in terms of the figure he gets per post. So he probably made about 70 posts in that year, but this brought in $135 million. And he played, in that year, he was in Manchester United Football Club, and he was paid 48 million, which is a massive amount for a football player. It's an enormous amount. But he made 2.5 times this amount through Instagram. Yeah? So this tells you something about people, because it's a different type of economy. It's a different type of economy. And you can see how the newspapers feed off some of these posts and play this back. And I keep thinking, why are they telling me about Beckham's son making a meal? And because he put it on his Instagram, and he's number 6 in UK Instagram hit list, and making maybe the same as Zoella we looked at.
Então, há toda uma economia que gira em torno desses influenciadores, que movimenta fortunas, né, muito impressionantes. O caso do Cristiano Ronaldo é esse, ele ganhou muito mais com os posts que ele fez, que nem foram tantos assim, do que com o dinheiro que ele ganhou do futebol, que não era pouco em termos de futebol, claro. E há constantemente uma ideia de que a mídia replica esse tipo de informação que circula nas redes, que os influenciadores postam, porque isso se tornou alguma coisa muito central hoje. Okay, back.
So this is something driven by internet advertising. And of course, there has been a major shift from advertising in magazines and television and the press to advertising on the internet. 62% of advertising revenue now comes from the internet. So that's a massive amount, which is $600 billion a year. Billion is a lot, 9 zeros, it's like a big amount. So it's a massive amount of investment. And you wonder on how it adds up. And I've not researched this area, I'm sure people are, but how this influence, what they actually buy and where they go as a result of this type of advertising, because like all advertising, you have to look at the data and it has to make sense. Otherwise, you're not going to put the money. You don't get the returns in terms of selling and consumption. It's not worth your advertising. So it is a big industry, and the internet, which could have gone many ways, went into a sort of large corporation, media corporation, social media corporation, Facebook, and the large computer companies, and has really pushed in this direction as a consumption economy as well.
Então, a publicidade na internet já responde por mais de 60% de todo o movimento de investimentos em publicidade no mundo. E a internet, que poderia ter tomado vários tipos de direção, ela está mais e mais, né, crescentemente enredada nas lógicas de consumo, na cultura do consumo. There you are.
Okay. Now I would like to look at immaterial consumption a little bit more. I want to skip some of the material in this section as we're a little bit tight on time. But what I'm trying to look at is the increase in use of the internet and the way in which when we purchase goods, we have a lot of auxiliary work around the goods. We research the purchase, we research the usage. So there's a complex of activities around the act of consumption. It's not just a question of going into the department store and buying something randomly. Yeah? Now there's a lot of planning and pre-planning of the act of purchase and comparisons of different places and sites. So we work at our research on consumption. And of course, we want an experience often from consuming. You know, sometimes we may buy on the internet, or sometimes we say, I'm going to the department store, I'm going to Selfridges because I want to look around. This is going to be my hour of leisure and I will just try and learn things, and I don't have a specific goal. Other times I may be more goal orientated. So sometimes we want an experience around the act of consumption. And of course, one of the ways this has been conceived is in terms of the prosumer, the idea that the Consumption Act involves a lot of other activities, and it's not just a simple act. And we can see increasingly when we have smart devices, smart machines, mobile phones, as we said earlier, they're passing on information about our activities, where we are, our preferences, what we do, what we like. And also, in many cases, like Apple Watches, they're monitoring our bodies. They're passing on blood pressure, glucose levels. Don't get too excited, you know, the computer is saying back to us, don't get too excited. But then it's also passing our data on somewhere, and we get an advert or an email saying, have you thought about taking this medication? This can stop your excitement level and reduce the dangers of a heart attack or stroke. So there's a sort of feedback loop into consumption and the profiling. And some of you may have come across a book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, by Zuboff, which is an interesting account of this use of data, the whole data economy. Okay.
Bom, ficou grande aqui. Primeiro, ok, thank you. Primeiro, ele fala do consumo de experiências, como que o consumo de experiências foi crescendo em importância, e depois do prosumer, a ideia de que o consumo é uma atividade que envolve atividade. Você requer-se muitas coisas do consumidor para consumir, né? Como, por exemplo, na questão dos aparatos inteligentes que a gente usa nas nossas vidas. A gente aprende a adotar um certo modo de vida, um certo tipo de vida baseado no consumo e baseada nessas experiências que as marcas mais e mais tentam nos oferecer. Next slide, please, Mike. The one about, yeah, the following one. Yes, this one.
This is now the consequences of consumption. So now I'd like to look at the consequences, and there's three questions I'd like to raise. What are the effects of screen interactions, handling digital data, the information overload, this 24/7 consumption and a whole range of pre-consumption activities? How does it affect our mental processes? How does it affect our sociality and sociability? Then how far is the internet really immaterial? It's not totally immaterial, because I see a computer in front of me. Somebody has to make it. So it's a material thing. What are the energy consequences of these devices? And what about the waste they generate? Then finally, what are the planetary consequences of consumer economy waste and the destruction of nature in terms of global heating, species extinction, and the Anthropocene era?
Ok, muito bem. Então, a próxima coisa aqui, o próximo tema que ele quer tratar nessa aula são as consequências do consumo. E ele escolhe três questões, né, sobre que se abrem a partir dessas novas formas de consumo. A primeira questão diz respeito às nossas interações regulares com as telas e nosso modo de lidar com os dados digitais. Será que isso tudo estaria nos levando a um superestímulo, a uma sobrecarga informacional? Essa mudança para um regime 24/7 de consumo online está mudando os ritmos da nossa vida, está produzindo novas formas de comportamento, né? Enfim, social. Que tipo de efeitos isso tem nos modos existentes de sociabilidade, socialidade e nossos processos mentais? A segunda questão diz respeito a internet e outras formas de consumo imaterial. Será que eles são realmente materiais? Quais são as consequências em termos de energia, de consumo de energia e de lixo, produção de lixo? Finalmente, quais são as consequências em termos do planeta, impactos planetários desse modo de vida baseado na cultura do consumo, como, por exemplo, no aquecimento global e etc.
Okay.
Okay, back to you.
Okay, one of the immediate thoughts on internet consumption is the sheer amount of information available. You know, this is Borges, Library of Babel. You know, it's just like so much, and it's very hard to know how to navigate, where to go. You're presented with so many different options for purchase. Yeah, so you have to research and research to find the one you purchase. Whereas in the past, maybe there was one item, you know, like the original Model T Ford car, you know, black. There's one color, black. So the consumer choice was pretty easy. But now we have incredible customization and differentiation of choice. So selectivity, how we select, how we make our life path through consumption becomes quite complicated and time consuming and difficult. Second point is that the internet screen trains us. It becomes compulsive. Yeah. Not only do we wake in the night, you know, we're looking for our phone. You know, we want to have it in our hand, and it can become drug-like. I mean, there are research on the dopamine surge we can get with internet, not just computer games, but many aspects and potential negative sides like autism, depression, whatever. So it's not all wonderful, but it tends to be the center of our life, that phone. If we lay it down, we don't know where it is, we're worried. So it may weaken our capacity to daydream. The daydreams are on the machine. They're not in our head necessarily. It's externalized. It also may influence I mentioned autism, sociability. We may be more on the screen, or we sat in a cafe, we're on the screen. We're walking with our friend, we're on the screen. So there's some loss of sociality and sociability.
Bem, algumas tentativas, né, de lidar com a primeira questão da sobrecarga de dados, a perda em termos de sociabilidade e também da nossa capacidade de sonhar acordado, né, de devanear. Então, como é que a gente lida com esse mar de dados? Como é que a gente navega nisso? Seja um problema de seletividade, de escolha de valor, né? O que a gente privilegia, né, nessa miríade de coisas para fazer. Essa cultura das telas nos treina para ficarmos mais e mais ligados nessas telas, como se fosse uma espécie de... Pode se tornar uma compulsão, uma coisa como se fosse uma droga, né? E isso pode enfraquecer a nossa capacidade de devanear, de imaginar alternativas. É muito importante. E também ter como futura consequência uma perda na nossa capacidade de socializar, né? Porque tudo é desenhado para que a gente fique mais e mais centrado no indivíduo, né? Então, como se a gente pudesse levar a solidão e uma espécie de autismo, né? Mas é claro que isso é uma possível consequência do uso de telas. As telas, elas próprias, podem ser usadas de outras formas.
Okay.
Back to you.
We think when we're using the internet, it may be immaterial. Yeah, we're in the cloud, but the cloud has a base. These are data centers. The data centers store data, and they take up a lot of energy. Yeah, they take up a lot of energy. I think 2, 3, 4, 5% of global energy is now used in data centers, and you can imagine this will increase as there's more and more data usage. So there's a material infrastructure to immaterial consumption. The cloud has roots somewhere. And of course, many of these devices incorporate toxic waste. E-waste is hazardous for recycling, and it has to go somewhere and can create problems. So the move towards a post-carbon society, which we need in terms of global heating, global warming, and planetary problems, is difficult to achieve in some ways with the levels of consumption we are engaged in. In one of the first slides, we said we would need, if we consume like Americans, everyone, we'd need 5 planets, 5 planet Earths. We've got 1, I'm afraid. So it suggests we've got to cut down a little bit or find different ways to consume. And this has led not only in the 70s to the Club of Rome limits to growth reports saying we should limit our growth and pull in, but that was largely ignored. But more recently, people talk about the Anthropocene, which means a new geological epoch in which all the sedimenting rocks now will contain some signs of human activity, such as radioactivity, and of course plastics, ubiquitous plastics, which aren't just the bottles, but little fragments of plastics, which are everywhere in the oceans and inside our bodies, of course. So there are people who say, well, the waste we produce from a consumer society, this is the most enduring aspect. This is our human contribution is waste, and maybe the waste will be the end of us. Some of the pessimists will say.
Bem, em relação à questão, a segunda questão da imaterialidade, né, da nuvem, ele fala que a nuvem tem uma infraestrutura bastante material, não só nos cabos, mas também os data centers, que utilizam quantidades incomensuráveis de energia, e também produzem um lixo eletrônico, né, tóxico, que é grandemente exportado aqui para o sul global. Enfim. A gente, embora a gente precise chegar e alcançar uma sociedade pós-carbono, a gente tem né, baseado em energia renovável e materiais reciclados, a gente tem esse grande desafio, que é essa demanda constante para novas mercadorias, novas modas, novos aparatos. Enfim, há um movimento global para que se limite o crescimento e também, crescentemente, essa tese do antropoceno, colocando que a nossa grande contribuição seria inevitável também, seria o nosso lixo, né? Os microplásticos estão aí para mostrar isso. Então, os sedimentos agora não são só de rochas, mas eles também contêm traços do lixo que a gente produz, radioatividade, microplástico, etc. Então, leva a pensar que o nosso lixo será o nosso fim. Ok, back to you.
So the waste tends to go from the global north to the global south, and very little adequate provision for recycling the waste, often limited, and problems are created by the West and the North dumping the waste in other countries. And not only countries, but the sea, and we hear a lot about plastics in the sea, which are in the fish we eat, but also they can deform the life in the seas, unfortunately. So let's look now at consumer culture futures. The first one is we can just continue on the level we are consuming, yeah? And we think, yeah, this is modernity, this is the modern society, we want the new, yeah? The modern is the new, yeah? And consumer culture, in some ways, wants new products to sell, new goods, new inventions, but we have to be aware that all new technologies have built-in accidents, yeah? They have built-in unintended consequences, yeah? The 20th century, we had smoking, yeah, killed 100 million people. We had the automobile. It killed also around 100 million people. I think the wars in the 20th century were slightly more, but it's sort of interesting to think of the unintended consequences of, the freedom to make something new without adequately thinking of its implications. And maybe we can't have that luxury of encouraging complete new innovation because of the risks that come along with it. The other problem, I think, of carrying on consuming is the danger of lack of regulation. The moment we have carbon trading schemes whereby people can offset the cost of their carbon by buying something in the global south, paying money to people who will plant some trees or whatever. But there's a lot of potential for corruption and things not happening. So there's a danger of green washing, yeah? Of trying to look green, but not really achieving it. And maybe the UN, it's a difficult thing. COP, the UN, they had a conference here in UK, in Glasgow and Montreal and places. They have regular, and they're doing a lot of good work. But it's sort of short-term contingency planning. Maybe we need something more profound to change.
Bem, então, o primeiro cenário de futuro é o cenário no qual a gente continuaria consumindo como a gente está, né? Um cenário que privilegia o planejamento e a continuação dos negócios como de costume. Isso tem problemas, né? Pode ocasionar problemas e riscos. É impressionante como a gente continua dando boas-vindas a inovações e a tecnologias que são potencialmente perigosas, pelo menos não testadas, em nome do progresso, em nome do lucro, em nome do progresso, em nome do lucro. Tem também esses negócios inspirados em troca, né, de carbono, então você apaga mitiga sua pegada de carbono comprando determinados esquemas, determinadas coisas, isso corre um perigo de se tornar mera lavagem, né? Mera greenwashing. E tem também um outro aspecto que ele tocou, que foi algumas iniciativas da ONU importantes, que, não obstante elas são iniciativas no sentido de tentar fazer a gestão desses problemas ecológicos globais e fazer uma espécie de plano contingencial de curto prazo. Essas iniciativas são importantes, mas elas são pontuais. A gente precisa de alguma coisa mais forte.
Okay. Quite a few sociologists, have written on this area, on the planetary questions, and Ulrich Beck, who died a few years ago. I start off with 3 people who died recently, and well, the 4th one, Zygmunt Bauman, also died. So these have died in the last 20, 30 years, but I don't know what the new generation are saying as much, but let's look at them. Ulrich Beck talked about the risk society, the accumulation of global risks, and wanted to try and develop a cosmopolitan world to somehow think of alternatives, as does Bernard Stiegler, who had some very interesting experiments in North Paris for trying to develop different types of consumption and internet usage with the people in that area. And Bruno Latour, again, another famous French theorist, also wanted to favor a more experimental approach to university education, to build in ecological questions into academic work, but also art. He wanted the arts built in to academic study in universities. Bauman really poses the question very well in his book, Does Ethics Have a Chance in a World of Consumers? Well, he's talking about one type of ethic, but his ethic is more of maybe a Kantian ethic, I don't know. But he sees consumer lifestyles as selfish, undermining social encounters. We could add to that. It's interesting to think about consumption, because one of the things Stiegler talks about is proletarianization, yeah? Karl Marx talked about the proletariat as the side effect of capitalist production, of the introduction of the factory system. But Stiegler talks about proletarianization of consumers, which at the first time you hear it, you think, wow, what's that? But he means what Marx talked about with capitalism was de-skilling of workers. Yeah. The work is machine-paced. They're looking after the machines. So what is the de-skilling of consumers? Well, it means everything is ready-made. It's the TV dinner. Yeah, everything is packaged and ready-made in front of you. You don't have to work with the objects. It's throwaway society. Yeah. You get your phone and you get your delivery, dun, 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 So everything becomes easy, but the consequences are invisible, really, of your purchasing act or the type of activity of the person who delivers it, his wages, where he is, where he goes, whatever. So a lot of invisibility. And I suppose the corollary might be we produce a lot of things, but some things could last a lot longer. In some societies, you have to repair things and conserve things. This may be one way forward to cut the overall profile of consumption or the negative consequences in terms of materials we produce and have to recycle as waste. So this is one possibility. But is this merely a middle-class dream, all this talk? Like the hippies in the 60s or whatever. It's a nice idea, but not really practical. It's not easy to change values, even if you try and educate people. Ideally, if you had this shift, it would need an active global public sphere, a global one. Well, it's hard to get public sphere in societies people actively engaging and debating and forming public opinion that affects politics. So a global one is a long way off, if ever, who knows. But this is a possibility.
Ok, bom, vamos lá, essa é grande. A segunda questão é a procura por alternativas, né, e algumas delas são a redução nos níveis de consumo, o conservacionismo e o meioambientalismo, enfim. E ele começa com Ulrich Beck, que argumentava que a gente precisava de novas instituições, novos modos de produção e de consumo, que fossem sensíveis a essa globalização do lixo, do desperdício, né, do refúgio. Outros teóricos do consumo e do antropoceno, como o Bernard Stiegler e o Bruno Latour, também falaram sobre a necessidade de desenvolvermos instituições experimentais. Bernard Stiegler chegou a propor experimentos interessantes no norte de Paris, assim como o Bruno Latour, que pensou um sistema, uma reforma do sistema educacional, um sistema acadêmico, que incorporasse questões da ecologia e também das artes. No entanto, esse tipo de... Bom, e também ele fala do Bauman, que pensa, nesse livro especificamente, será que a ética tem uma chance nesse mundo de consumers, de consumidores, um livro de 2008, o Paulo está falando da ética kantiana, claro, a gente sabe que há outras éticas em questão, e numa ideia de que, para o Bauman, né, enfim, os estilos de vida baseados no consumo são individualistas, e tendem a minimizar ou a empobrecer a nossa capacidade de empatia, de sociabilidade, de cuidado com os outros. Há também uma outra questão, cuidado com as coisas, né? Talvez seja um sonho de classe média, uma coisa que não é fácil, porque não é fácil mudar valores. Também o ideal seria a gente conseguir uma mudança e conseguir uma esfera pública ativa, né? Mas isso também não é fácil. Ok.
So, the problem is, if you wanted a global public sphere, really you would need a global state. Now, it might be nice one way to think we have a global state, because a global state would mean, like a nation state, if it was a strong state, it would be able to monopolize the means of violence within its territory. Yeah, it would have police force and army and whatever. It could keep the peace effectively. So a global state would, you think, keep the global peace, which is a sort of nice idea in a way. But it would also, a state has not just a monopoly of violence, which was Max Weber's big contribution. It would have a monopoly of taxation. Yeah, so it would be able to tax people. There wouldn't be tax havens to retreat to. You couldn't get in your yacht and go and find some place to register your company and pay no taxes, because they would have enforcement and they would search out. So everyone paid their taxes. It's a nice idea, but you don't hear anybody advocating this, because it's impossible in the present condition to think of how you would see it. Rather, we've had historically, especially with Europe, and Europe has tended to spread out with modernity and dominate a lot of parts of the world, we've had competition between nation states, England and France, England and Spain, France. So we've had lots of inter-European nation state competition, which furthered nationalism, a strong nationalism, and helped to form the states as separate, strong entities. Now, is this just going to continue? We thought with globalization from the 1990s, economic globalization, states were withering away. Yeah, we had low tax regimes, lower and lower taxes, moving goods around the world, post-Fordism, dispersed production, etc. Finance moving easily. But now we seem to have moved away from that after 2007. We've gone back to nation states with their own financial ideas, and we've had more regulation and tariffs against outsiders. So we've gone back to a little bit to the, previous type of power struggle, Darwinist contest, if you like. Where will this go? We don't know. But the Ukraine war adds to this type of idea that some people say a return to a bipolar world of competing blocs, USA, China. We had Soviet Union and USA in the 1950s after the Second World War. Now we may be going to go into another phase with increased competition economically and maybe some violence. And so it doesn't necessarily look fantastically good on a global level. And then when you stand that alongside economic globalization, and then you stand that next to the Anthropocene and the problems, planetary problems, you can see there's not an easy solution, although there are people working on these ideas, and we should not be pessimistic. We should find ways.
Muito bem. A terceira questão, se a gente pensa numa governança global, será que a gente pode pensar na emergência de um Estado global? E aí há toda uma argumentação no sentido de que houve uma época que se acreditou, né, na década de 90, que a gente estaria se transformando num mundo com enfraquecimento dos estados nacionais em direção por conta da globalização econômica, mas isso parece ter mudado, esse cenário parece ter mudado bastante a partir de 2007, da crise de 2007, e hoje o que se assiste é uma espécie de recrudescimento dos Estados-nação e também dessas lutas de poder dentro do mundo, né? Enfim, se antes a gente tinha uma polarização Rússia-Estados Unidos, agora talvez a gente esteja assistindo à emergência de uma nova polarização Estados Unidos-China. A guerra da Ucrânia coloca mais um elemento nisso, mas a gente não pode ser pessimista, ele diz, há muita gente trabalhando em soluções e a gente precisa continuar investindo nessas aberturas e nessas soluções. Okay, back.
So we need to find some way beyond current levels of consumption and a neoliberal economy. It's hard to see how we can easily reduce consumption. It might be difficult. It would maybe need carbon taxes, maybe some form of rationing, but this would be difficult, especially with the existing type of economy, which has favored the growth of inequalities. Of course, the rich and the super rich enjoy a very high degree of mobility and in some ways immunity from local taxation. They're often registered or live in various parts of the world. Of course, people who are rich who come to London often have tax-free deals to come here. So it's not just some exotic island which is the source of tax freedom. How can we develop a different order where there is a greater amount of responsibility throughout, including the super rich, and solve the problems consumption is accumulating in terms of global problems?
Bom, nesse slide, além do neoliberalismo, se argumenta que reduzir o consumo seria talvez impopular, né? As pessoas têm direito de gastar seu dinheiro onde elas querem, então restringir o consumo por meio de imposto, né, sobre carbono, outras formas de racionamento, enfim, poderiam ameaçar a legitimidade desse sistema, principalmente porque há uma enorme desigualdade em relação aos ricos e super ricos, que conseguem, de alguma forma, de várias formas, quase que se mover num outro tipo de circuito. Então, eles têm imunidade dos sistemas tributários, imunidade a respeito de outras responsabilidades, porque eles conseguem se mover, usam paraísos fiscais. Esses seriam os verdadeiros cosmopolitas, como diz o Bauman, que seriam, enfim, cortejados por diferentes governos que oferecem a eles incentivos para que eles vivem lá. Eles são os verdadeiros móveis, né? Mas, por outro lado, a crescente desigualdade leva a uma crescente falta de credibilidade do próprio sistema também. Então, há, claro, certo quantidade de filantropia, o capitalismo baseado na filantropia por parte de fundações privadas e etc., mas essas prioridades são sempre determinadas por esses doadores, né? esses patrocinadores. Back to you.
Final thought. Consumption is meant to bring happiness. Yeah, maybe the rich people, super rich, are just following a consumer culture logic: get more money, get more wealth, and enjoy consuming. And it's interesting in this context, their attitude of some of the ones in California, Silicon Valley, some of the billionaires have been interested in longevity. I mean, some have been interested in going to different planets.
Yes.
In case this one doesn't make it, you know. But other ones are interested in living a long time. So if you're having the best of all possible lives in the best of all possible worlds, why not enjoy it forever? So look at living to 500 years, or even overcoming death via cryonics and nanotechnology, whatever. So the search for immortality has been given a boost by the billionaires in Silicon Valley. So how do you read this? Is it a lack of fellow feeling, a sense of common fate with humanity, a religious or other sort of ethics? Or is it just a normal part of life, a part of economy and consumption? You might say, well, they should pay some taxes. They shouldn't just float around. Higher levels of inequality actually impede economic growth, a number of studies suggest, and reduce people's sense of well-being. So the equation that more wealth equals more happiness, you know, this is utilitarianism, isn't it, which was strong in the 19th century. The greatest happiness of the greatest number was a driving force in economic thought at the time. So this is a sort of central aspect. But when we look at happiness, there was a recent happiness index, which country came top? Well, it wasn't the United States, which you would have thought with more billionaires and more money. It was Bhutan. And some of you may say, well, Bhutan, where's that? You know, well, it's a small landlocked kingdom in the middle of the Himalayas, I don't know which way you should say it. And it's less than 1 million people, largely Buddhist and largely traditional. They have the highest happiness index. So happiness maybe is difficult to achieve. It's ephemeral, but we have to think about, well, what are we doing it for? But the happiness aura is in the immaterial levels of consumption. It's like an aura hanging over us. It's in the advertising, the smiling faces, the happy families, whatever. But when we look down, we notice the consequences of happiness, perhaps. We see there are waste, there are problems accumulating around our feet. So consumer culture has to look up and it has to look down.
Muito bem. Finalmente, a busca da felicidade, né? A gente já saiu, segundo ele, daquela máxima vigente no século XX, que mais riqueza levaria a maior felicidade. Não vivemos mais assim, não acreditamos mais nisso. Quando a gente olha, por exemplo, os índices de felicidade, não são os Estados Unidos que ganham, os maiores índices de felicidade estão no Butão, país pequenininho, com um pouco mais de 1 milhão de habitantes. Enfim, será que acontece nessa luta, nessa busca de felicidade? Ele fala também dos super ricos que alguns deles, enquanto alguns deles investem... Por favor, gente, será que vocês podiam fechar o microfone? Todo mundo que não está diretamente envolvido, obrigada. Estava vazando o som aqui. Enquanto alguns super ricos investem na possível vida e colonização de outros planetas, caso esse aqui não dure muito, outros investem suas fortunas na tentativa de viver para sempre, né? Alcançar a imortalidade, domar o envelhecimento e mesmo a morte. O que está acontecendo? Que tipo de investimento é esse? Como é que a gente pode olhar para esse tipo de investimento? Será que isso é uma espécie de total falta de empatia, total falta de uma sensação de um futuro comum? Essas crescentes inequalidades entre ricos, os muito ricos e o resto do mundo, né, os 99%, certamente contribuem para desestabilizar, ou pelo menos para colocar em questão os ideais da cultura do consumo, os sonhos da cultura de consumo. E voltando para a questão da felicidade, enquanto ela pode ser certamente efêmera, a felicidade, há todo um estímulo na cultura do consumo para que se procure, né, a felicidade, para que se atinja a felicidade, para que se chegue lá. Mas é cada vez mais difícil evitar olhar para cima. Enquanto a gente olha para cima buscando a felicidade, é cada vez mais difícil deixar de olhar para baixo, onde o lixo está se acumulando. Back, Mike.
Well, that is happiness. And the end.
Yay!
We made it. Thank you for
We made
listening.
it! Okay, thank you. Well, I would like now to invite you for a little break, and then we come back for a very, very short question and answer part. We have not many minutes left. Então, gente, eu vou convidar o professor agora para fazer um pequeno intervalo mesmo de 5 minutos, que eu tinha combinado com ele. Depois a gente volta para muito, muito, muito pequeno espaço para perguntas. Vou fazer aqui um compilado das perguntas que a gente já tem no chat. Se alguém quiser colocar mais alguma, aproveita esse momento. Eu vou reunir e vou fazer realmente um compilado para ele responder como ele puder. Meu combinado com ele era ele ficar com a gente até 12h30, a gente tem 10 minutinhos. Então, realmente é uma pequena pausa dessa aula sensacional, só para não dizer que ele não respondeu nada. Okay, there are a lot of people thanking you for the brilliant class. And,
thank you.
And a couple of questions that I will now pass on to you. Okay, I'm going to start. One of the teachers at our school, he's very much interested in hearing you. How do you understand the creative and cultural entrepreneurship when you compare it and criticize the entrepreneurial self of neoliberalism? So, how do you understand, and how would you conceptualize the creative and cultural entrepreneur?
It's an important question, and I wouldn't want to say all creativity is bad, because I think creativity is good. And a lot of people have thought about this question. For Foucault, who has this discussed in The Birth of Biopolitics, the entrepreneurial self is seen as maybe self-centered and maybe negative. And Foucault talks about the care of the self. And he looks at the Stoics in ancient Rome and the ancient Greeks, and tries to think about a ethic of aesthetics, a sort of different type of way of living. So that is one way you might try and think about it. Creativity is interesting because creativity can be economic creativity, starting new companies. It can be artistic creativity. In my college, we have a lot of artists, and the Bohemians valued creativity. So the cultural sector, we live in an economy with a big cultural sector with a lot of emphasis upon creatives and creativity. But I suppose it's also questions about the consequences of that type of creativity, of where it leads socially and the negative consequences in terms of, like Latour might say, in terms of the Anthropocene and climate change and whatever. And I think there's a third element I'd mention, and that is the work of Bernard Stiegler, who was very critical of digital algorithmic logic, which tends to reduce creativity. And he, for a long time, was trying to think practically, like I mentioned in North Paris, to get experiments with ordinary people to think of using computers in a different way, a slightly different way, working with professionals, local people, the city and whatever. So practically on one level, but also he wanted to think about another way of computing. If you could find computers used in it, it's not a romantic notion, but it's a very difficult notion to ground. But there's some people like Giuseppe Longo, who is also one of his group, who are working in Paris in this area. So there are some people trying to think about those particular questions of the impact of this information technology and digital frameworks on our lives as being negative in terms of creativity. And we all have a tremendous potential for creativity. So it's a good question, and I can't answer it completely, but those are some thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask you please to stop sharing your screen so we can see you better?
Good.
Mike. Can you stop sharing your screen?
Oh,
Mike?
sorry.
Yeah. So that we can see.
Yeah.
Just so that we can see you better. Okay, great. Thanks. Now there's another.
Good.
There are many questions here. I'm just going to ask you one more, at least. One of them has to do with research on some original people's use of the internet in Brazil has shown that the internet can be used to potentialize union, participation, and the strengthening of democracy. This leads us to think that the question is not the internet, but the way we use it. Doesn't that have something to do with what Bernard Stiegler was trying to say?
I think this is true, and I think immediately you said this, I think of Bruno Latour, actor network theory, talking about a gun. It's not the gun that's bad, it's the man plus gun. It's the network man and gun. So I think this is true. It's not a question of changing technology. And I lived through the 1990s, and I wrote some things I'm slightly ashamed of now on cyberspace and cyber bodies and the growth of cyberspace as a way out of people with embodied problems. They could live in cyberspace like William Gibson, a three-dimensional virtual reality space. And I got too drunk, like some people did, on the rhetoric and the ideas of that time. But we didn't see round the corner was the commercialization of the internet and the way in which that has led to massive corporate growth in that sector and domination of a global economy. And all economies practically around the world have had to come into line with this type of thinking. So it could be used in a different way, but at the moment, influencers, Instagram, 135 billion Ronaldo. So, I would love to see this used in a different way. Okay, you can look at Zuboff's, Shoshana Zuboff's book on surveillance capitalism, and many people talk about the 1890s, the Gilded Age, yeah? And Mark Twain wrote a book on the Gilded Age, right? And the parallels between the super rich people then and now. And then something came after it. Well, what came after it was the progressive movement in America, which was a ground swelling of opinion. Some of these were radical Christians and other people concerned about urban poverty and whatever, some university people. So there was like an alliance. And I think, there is a ground swelling of democratization. We've had some tough times. You've had some tough times. US has had some tough times. We've had some tough times here in the UK with a certain type of demagogic politician seizing on the opportunity and using the internet for fake news and enlisting very dubious people, some of them from Russia and other parts of the world, former Israeli intelligence people who start companies to send out fake news and fake emails and stimulus. So, but the question is, how do we police it? It's a very difficult thing to globally police. Like I said, a global state is possible, but how do we monopolize violence and taxation to some extent, or how do we get treaties to regulate it? But I have faith that regulation will come. We used to have pirates in the sea everywhere. We still have a few, but we got regulation. So maybe there will be, we have to believe in regulation and hope it comes soon.
All right, thank you. There's a last question. I promise this is the last one. Can we still dream?
I think this is, I think of Stiegler, noetic dreaming, so I think, as long as we have sleep, we will dream. And as long as we aren't over-regulated, we will have daydreams. As long as I don't work for Amazon and have to have roller skates rushing around a big factory unit and have no breaks, I can maybe have time to dream a little bit. But some of the bottom end jobs now, we used to call them Mac jobs, but Mac jobs look very good now compared to the current level of jobs. So I think it makes you angry, the level of what's happening to ordinary people at the bottom end with this process. We're okay academics, but there's a lot of people suffering the consequences of these inequalities. But I think in the past, and you look at the ancient Greeks, we always go back to them, but you get oligarchs, then you get dictatorship, then you get monarchies, but then you get democracy again. It breaks out. So we got to believe that there is some cycle of resistance, and that people will find the means of knowledge production, means of communication, to use. This is what we're skilled at, communication, we think, but we should find a way of developing alternative usages. The problem is, and this is one area we've been researching in the journal Theory, Culture and Society, is the knowledge apparatus, the scholarly apparatus we operate with, is very much dominated by Google, the Google search engine. It's a very biased search engine, but all PhDs, postgraduates, everyone has to use this. So our apparatus of scholarship has been infiltrated by this computer logic. And I find very few academics who even think about questioning it. This is not to say about artificial intelligence and about the essays coming in, which are being written by machines and submitted. So the encouragement of cheating for students and academics to send their articles written by third parties. The system is encouraging this, and we have to find ways of overcoming this and even thinking post-university or a different form of the university, because we have to think of different forms of assessment. Maybe the Greek, the dialogue, we have to somehow make a dialogue way, like a defense when you do a PhD. Or maybe people have to go back to exams, written exams in a room. I think the old way of assignment is going to be dead. So you know, we're on the edge, maybe some ways between eras, but we have to somehow start thinking about new forms and not just going along with this existing form we're in.
Well, thank you so much. I don't want to take up too much of your time. We're already 3 minutes later than we had agreed. I thank you so much for that. Well, yeah. It was a great honor to have you with us, Professor. There would be other questions, but these will stay with us and we'll try to deal with them internally. Thank you so much.
Well, it's a pleasure, and I enjoyed the opportunity. And if anybody wants to contact me, go through Gisela or email me at Goldsmiths. I'm happy to talk and discuss.
Thank you so much, Professor. And thank you so much, everybody that was with us today. And be sure the recording of this presentation will be uploaded soon in the YouTube channel of our program. So it will be available to anyone who wants to go back and listen to specific parts. Thank you so much. And
thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Everybody. All the best.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All the best.